Back here on the Cover 3 podcast, live on CBS Sports Network. It's Big Game Breakdown. And we've got our attention on a huge non conference matchup in the Big Ten as Nebraska will be squaring off once again against Colorado. Now, there is a lot that has changed from last year's matchup to this year's matchup, but mostly on the Nebraska side. So, Danny, why don't you get us started with this quarterback matchup? In week one, Shedeur Sanders was able to help the Buffs avoid an upset against North Dakota State. Dylan Raiola kind of poured it on a little bit against UTEP. What did you see from both of these quarterbacks in week one? What are you expecting in this particular matchup?
I think we already knew what we get out of Shedeur Sanders, right? More of what we saw last year was with elite college football quarterback play. I mean, he made great decisions, made big throws, and he's got great weapons to work with. We still saw him running for his life somewhat, getting sacked a few times. So I think we knew what we got there. I was really happy, and so was Matt Rule, and so was every single Nebraska Cornhusker fan with what you saw out of Dylan Raiola. And even mentioned after the game, talking about it wasn't so much the stat line, throwing for a couple hundred yards and having a couple touchdown passes, but the way that he managed the game. I think that's going to be huge because the bigger the stage, the more the tendency, the temptation is to try to go toe to toe with Shedeur Sanders, to try to feel like every drive, I've got to make a huge play and I have to do this. And so you start to force the ball when maybe a punt would be just fine and taking a sack is okay. That to me is what I think will be really fascinating to see play out. Also, we saw Colorado's defense struggle against the run. That was one thing. Nebraska did run the ball really well against UTEP. I would expect them to try to do the same so that you don't have your young freshman quarterback in third and longs and in awkward situations where he might make some of those mistakes early. I think that's the best thing that Mac Rule can do for Dylan Raiola is giving him that run game that he had against UTEP.
It's a pretty fascinating matchup, right? So Colorado, because it doesn't really have a tight end, and because it has a lot of really good receivers, they operate almost exclusively out of 4 and 5 wide, and they don't really have much of a run game. I'm fascinated to see just how patient can Nebraska's defense force Shedeur Sanders to be. If I'm defensive coordinator Tony White, he's a guy who's known for having a ton of different looks. He's one of the hardest guys to go against in the country. My number one goal is to deny explosive plays, right? I'm going to dare Colorado to run the football. I'm going to play with a light box. That means, fewer guys in the box against the run game. And I think some of my defensive linemen can win up front against Colorado's offensive linemen and defend the run without really devoting a lot of capital in terms of the number of defenders to defend that run. And then if Colorado does progress the ball down the field, I'm going to try to win in the red zone. When you watch Colorado against North Dakota State, really their only answer in the red zone was to throw the ball to Travis Hunter, which is a pretty damn good answer. However, I do think Nebraska probably has better players to defend that, right? Like you need multiple answers in the red zone. So I think if you're Nebraska, you deny explosives, you have a pretty good shot to win the game if you come out on the good side of spinning the wheel with that red zone roulette. If Shedeur finds a way to score a lot of touchdowns in the red zone, then Colorado probably wins the game. But can they dare them to run the ball? And if so, can Colorado meet that challenge?
Yeah, going back to last week's Colorado game, it did feel like a lot more of the same of what we saw last year. And it was a close game against North Dakota State. But I think what a lot of people are possibly overlooking is that the North Dakota State that Colorado faced is not the North Dakota State that was winning FCS titles a few years ago. It's not as good of a team as it used to be. So the fact that they were kind of able to hang in and make that a game, to me, is somewhat alarming if I'm a Colorado fan, particularly coming into this game, because when you watched the Buffs last week, the offensive line, which was a huge problem for that team last year, looked better against North Dakota State. But the average weight of the defensive lineman on North Dakota State two deep is 261 pounds. The average weight of the Nebraska defensive line that Colorado's facing this week is 276, and that includes the big 300-pound Nash Hutmacher sitting in the middle. So you're right, bud. If I'm Nebraska, I dare you to run the ball against us because I don't think you can. You couldn't run the ball last week against North Dakota State, so why do I think you're going to be able to do it to me now? The concern that I have if I'm Nebraska going into this game is that watching last week's game against UTEP, like it was a very similar situation to what we discussed with Texas. Nebraska wasn't trying to show you a whole lot. They were sticking to pretty basic and vanilla coverages on defense. But they were a little susceptible. UTEP was able to get some stuff done on them through the air, and UTEP doesn't have nearly the receiver talent that Colorado has, and Colorado will try to spread you out and get you into those situations to where you can make mistakes. And if you make a mistake against a Travis Hunter, you're done. It's going to be a touchdown. So that's going to be key. Nebraska's going to have to figure out a way to keep the big plays in front of them. And on the other side, Dylan Raiola did look excellent in that game, and I want to see how smart and how patient he can be against this Colorado defense because they play a lot of man coverage. In fact, if you look at the stats, they play over 71% of the time last week in man, which was the third highest rate in the country of anybody who played. They seem to think Shedeur Sanders is Ed Reed. They play a lot of man underneath and let Shiloh freelance in the back. The problem with that is Ed Reed's in the Hall of Fame because he's Ed Reed. Most guys are not Ed Reed, and I do not put Shiloh Sanders in the category of Ed Reed. So I expect to see Dylan Raiola and this Nebraska offense take advantage of that, whether it's Isaiah Nayor or if it's the other kid whose name completely escapes my mind right now. I just think that Banks, thank you, Jamal Banks. I think that the Cornhuskers will be able to take advantage of that. I do not think this will be a game like last season, in which Nebraska turned the ball over roughly 11 billion times and lost in Boulder. If they take care of the football, I think Nebraska is the better team, and I think they come home with the win here.
I just want to piggyback on what you guys were saying about Nebraska's defense. Totally agree with the game plan, what it should be. This is an offense that likes to get big plays. They like to take shots down the field. Shedeur likes to be aggressive with the football. Light box, as Bud mentioned, when I was at 1995 at Florida State, at Virginia, we ran against them. They rushed 3 and dropped 8 all night. We threw it 67 times, had 456 yards passing, but we lost the game. They didn't give up the big play. I did throw 3 interceptions. I didn't want to drop that one on you guys, but it was like forced, and we kept on it. And Mark Richt, the offensive coordinator, he said his biggest regret after that game was not running the ball more. Make them run the ball because they don't really want to. They want to put it on Shedeur's shoulders. When you look at the box, when you're calling plays, make them run the football. Make them do something they really don't want to do, and you still might be able to stop them running the football with that light box. So totally agree with you guys on what Nebraska should do defensively.
Did y'all have a good running back that year, Danny?
Just a guy named Warwick Dunn, who wasn't bad.
Yeah. Yeah, that's okay. All right. Okay. So again, similar to what we said, we've got a Locks podcast on Thursday. Come hang out 11 a.m. Eastern time. But as you're looking at this in terms of the handicap, Danny, what stands out to you as something that you're at least starting to ruminate on here early in the week?
I think this will be a higher scoring affair. I do. I think Nebraska will be able to figure out ways to put points on Colorado's defense. We didn't see much improvement there. And I do think that Colorado, with some of the firepower they showed, with Shedeur calling the shots, with Travis Hunter out there, he had 3 touchdowns last week. He's almost unstoppable, even if you throw it to him in coverage. I think it'll be a higher scoring game. So that's kind of where I'm leaning, is sort of towards a little bit more of a higher scoring affair.
I lean lower scoring because I do think that Nebraska lacks the personnel to cover Colorado. So I think they need to, as we said, devote all those numbers, a lot of short passes, a lot of completions, clock runs. And if I'm Nebraska on offense, I'm taking my sweet time, man. I do not want Shedeur Sanders to have 11, 12, 13 drives. I'd like a nice little sweet spot of like maybe 7 drives for Shedeur, okay? Hitting the receivers, running the ball, taking that clock. Oh, what I got on the helmet radio. Cool, let me make my adjustments here. Low pace game. I tend to think it's a little slower.
Yeah, Bud and we are simpatico on this one. I think it'll be lower scoring. And because of that, I also think Colorado will be able to stick around and make this one close. So my leans at this point are on the under and Colorado in the points.
Let's go a little Nebraska team total over. I've seen that Buffs defense against North Dakota State. Dylan Raiola is going to go and light it up. Okay, but you got to come on Thursday to hang out for all of the locks. But coming up on the other side, we're going to send you out with one player in the Big Ten that you should keep your eye on, maybe set for a big performance. We'll let you know next.